if you have your phone, you can see when it's on YouTube, Facebook. Oh, I'm sorry. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma alamna ma yanfa'una وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الهزن إذا شئت سهلا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. I praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I thank Allah for the endowments of Islam. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of brother and sisterhood in Islam. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all the sincere intention and to make our gathering here in this Black Imams Roundtable a beneficial gathering, an accepted gathering, a gathering that draws us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, helps us to earn the reward from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, helps us earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and helps us seek Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And today, alhamdulillah, we are honored this morning in a special episode of the Black Imams Roundtable, early morning, to have two promising Black Muslim sisters and teachers and educators and students in Islam who wear many hats. You know, in the academic field, they were successful. In Islamic studies, they are successful. And mashallah, it's an honor to have this conversation with them. Inshallah, with us is Sister Nuriddeen, Father Nuriddeen, Sheikh Nuriddeen Knight, and her sister is now joined, alhamdulillah, Ustada, Sheikha, Sister Faatimah. So inshallah, we're going to have a open conversation. We don't hold you. There's your thoughts. Go. This is a brother and sister conversation. You don't have to feel nervous. We're just family talking about our conditions here. So what I want to do is open the conversation with getting an introduction briefly about yourselves, along with the subject matter that we've been covering, which is the state of Islam in Black America. You can tackle that however you like. In an opening, 10 minutes apiece for both of you. So you would put your introduction and a general thought of the topic, and then we have some points that y'all wanted to discuss that we'll go in them in order, inshallah. So whoever's the oldest, out of respect, we always go first.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for having us on. Alhamdulillah, I'm really grateful to be on this platform. Mashallah, I was a student of Imam Amin for many years. And alhamdulillah, I was able to further my studies in Jordan and here in the States, mashallah. So as well as that, I have an academic background in psychology. That's what I got my bachelor's and master's in. And so, yeah, that's a bit about my education. And then I'm also a writer, speaker, etc. On the question of Islam in Black America, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that we have in Black America pretty much a residue of Islam, a residue of what people believe Islam to have been or have done for the community. So we know that as Sheikh Amin and some other imams were speaking about in another roundtable, there were movements like the Ansar, like the Nation of Islam, and other movements that were so beneficial to the Black community that we still have that bit of a residue and that positive impression of Islam in the Black community. And so we're grateful for that. And as has already been discussed, there's a lot of work that was left incomplete or just halted because of the, I guess, Black Muslim exodus into Sunni Islam away from some of those movements. And inshallah ta'ala, I think that our job that a lot of us are recognizing is to marry together the work that was being done and the organization that was being done back then with the blessing of traditional Sunni Islam. So those would just be my initial thoughts on the state of Islam in Black America.
Ustadha Faatimah, your turn, inshallah.
Bismillah. First of all, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for having me on. Okay, so a little bit about me. My relevant background is that I got my bachelor's in Islamic law and theology from Zaytuna College in California. And then I got my master's in religious studies in Chicago. And I've sort of been, writing about issues that intersect with the Muslim community and contemporary challenges here and there. But I also, I have a family and things like that, so I have a lot of things that I'm juggling. But alhamdulillah, I am the younger of the sisters, and I'm actually the youngest, so I will always be last to go. So Islam in Black America, I would echo everything that my sister said, and I would say that I think historically the place that Black Muslims have had in the Black community was that we were seen as and kind of asserted ourselves as moral leaders, as visionaries, as spiritual leaders, people of spiritual strength. I do think some of that has been lost, and some of that may be attributed to what my sister said about the Black exodus into Sunni Islam, that now Black Muslims sort of occupy more than one space in terms of the communities that we feel affiliated to. So we have sort of multiple allegiances, and there's nothing wrong with that, because there's always time to sort of recuperate any of that lost legacy. But I do think that it's as moral and spiritual leaders and visionaries that, we should find ourselves. And we also intersected with, artistry. There were many prominent Black Muslim artists, and there still are. That hasn't died down perhaps as much as other areas where we've contributed to the culture. But certainly I think that there's a renaissance that perhaps needs to happen.
So in relation, as we're talking about those previous communities that were mentioned and the status of most of African Americans coming into Sunni Islam, and we talk about in the past, those communities, as they're identified with Islam and their understanding, were also leaders in the community. So I want to ask you about two things. How do you see leadership compared to what you've known in the Black community in the past? Like if you're looking at Alhaj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, or even others who claimed Islam and had an impact on the Black community, like Minister Farrakhan, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, and all of these movements that existed, and compared to Black leadership now, and then also what should the Black leadership, Muslim leadership look like in our community? And really in the world, because it's not just local, but we're talking about national and global in our approach in dealing with issues.
Neri, you want to go?
Whoever wants to go first, is y'all sure?
So I would say that, and Allahu Alam, but in my view or observation, I think that the Black Sunni Muslims have largely become somewhat of our own group. So there's not as strong of an affiliation with our Blackness. Of course, we're still in the Black community, still live in the Black community. But I think the kind of debt that maybe some other movements felt towards the Black community and bettering it as a whole is not necessarily felt, at least by the collective of Black Muslims. And it's an interesting thing, because I guess it's a loss and a plus, because we see ourselves as part of the larger ummah. So, but it's funny, because then it can end up harming ourselves, right? So we have no problem and I'm not saying this is wrong necessarily, but we have no problem giving money, raising money for Yemen or for Palestine or for this or that. But it's rare for someone to say, well, let's raise money to give, food to people in this project. Those people are suffering over there. Or let's give money, let's have money aside for the orphans in the Black community with all the, high rates of fatherlessness. Let's have some money that goes there towards those children. Even in our dua, honestly, if you listen to the dua of our imams, then we forget about ourselves. The Muslims around the world in general, okay, we're included in that. And we'll call out different countries that are Muslim countries, but we forget about our own people here and about their state. And so I think we gain something by seeing ourselves as a part of that larger ummah, but we lost something by kind of not seeing ourselves as strongly, I'd say, indebted to our community and to community improvement.
Yeah, I think what you said is really interesting about us sort of being our own group, and I do see that in a lot of ways, because many Black Muslim communities can be quite tight knit, and almost self-sustaining in a way, and sort of separate from the general Black community. Not always the case. I think there's always that relationship and that interplay, but because for many Black Muslims, there's been a really sort of positive integration of our Black culture and our Islamic values, then we are sort of a standalone community, and we do see ourselves as a part of a global Muslim community as well. So, like I said before, we have these multiple allegiances, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it may be that we prioritize one of those allegiances or affiliations more than others, and perhaps we need to find a way to be more nimble, so that when, for instance, the Black community needs more of our attention and our compassion and our love, that we're able to sort of quickly address that, not address it quickly, but be able to pivot and pour our attention in that direction, in the way that, like you were saying, Nuri, that we're able to kind of very quickly pivot to these international issues of Muslim concern, right? They very much so pull on our heartstrings, and we get very emotional if something tragic happens in the Muslim world. And I think we have, a similar emotionality, of course, for things that happen in the Black community, but perhaps we don't always know how to translate that into action in the same way that we're often able to translate our emotionality to the global community in dollars, for instance, like you were. And maybe that translation doesn't happen as fluidly to local issues as it may need to be in order to see the kind of progress and development that we need.
Question, Ustadha Faatimah. Why do you think that we have, as Muslims, so we're looking at two pictures. Number one, as a Muslim, we're a Muslim in the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a whole, but we also have a specific relationship with our culture as Black Americans.
Right.
Why do you think it's easier, as you mentioned, for Black American Muslims to relate to a global issue or an international issue related to other communities among the Muslims, but when it comes towards their own Black culture and Black circumstances, that there is a difficulty moving into action towards that? Why do you think that exists?
You know, I think one reason for it could actually be fairly positive, in that we really take seriously the idea that, you know, your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your religion, your deen is more important than your culture and more important than your race. And I think a lot of us have really embodied that. And so I think it manifests in particular ways. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a negative thing, in the sense that, oh, we feel this spiritual alignment, right, with the global Muslim population, because our spirituality and our religiosity, and the fact that we call ourselves Muslims matters to us more than our race and our culture. And I think that's how it's supposed to be. But at the same time, we're not meant to, subdue or, efface any aspect of our culture and these things that were given to us by God, by nature, our the color of our skin, and our community, where we were born, etc. We're not meant to subdue those things. But I think sometimes in our efforts to be, people of God, that can happen almost accidentally. That's what I would say.
Nuriddeen, let me ask you a question related to that. So what do you think is the best way or an optimal way for us to join between our religiosity and our loyalty towards our culture and our people, and the circumstances that our people here in America as Black American, which is a unique situation that create other situations, but it is something unique, and the whole world is facing that now. What is the optimal way that we join between the two?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think I agree with your point, my sister's point about it's not necessarily negative; it could be positive. And I think even culturally, Black people as a whole in this country, we are often people who put others before ourselves, and we take that to heart. And maybe especially as Muslims, we take it even further to heart. The problem is that even though that's ideal and that's how Muslims should operate, that we should see ourselves as one ummah, one brotherhood, there's the issue of, if Black people are always doing that, but no one else is doing that, then we're sort of always at a loss in a practical sense, right? So then it can be a problem. I think I want to point out that my sister, alhamdulillah, I guess this was a couple years ago now, then she had raised money for a church that was set on fire due to a racist who came in the church and set it on fire. And I think that something like that is a beautiful example to see ourselves as that's a part of our history. For example, is these attacks by racists, whether it's KKK, whatever kind of white supremacists, and that even though we're Muslim, we see ourselves as a part of those people, as other Black people who could also be attacked. And we see ourselves as one, and that be at least a part of the reason why we are moved to band together and help each other and aid one another. I think, yes, how would you change that? I feel like it's a shift in mindset in one sense, because in the past, and something that I have tried to think about, is there was this very specific idea of Islam for Black people, right? The message to the Black man, it was very specific. And I think that in leaving and in trying to leave all that behind, some for good reason, we lost this idea that Islam is for everyone, every type of person, every individual. And so there is a message for Black people in there. But are we not, I don't know, are we not really owning Islam for ourselves and being able to message it in a way that's specifically for our people, that would specifically benefit our people, as well as benefiting ourselves? So even the idea of self-love, as Imam Siraj said in the past roundtable, that he loves being Black because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him. So loving ourselves as Black people, wanting to take care of ourselves, wanting to self-preserve, is, I believe, can be seen as a part of Islam, because that's who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us. So I think that if we can move away from the idea that identifying as Black or putting ourselves as Black, I don't want to say first, but at least caring about our own preservation, if we can get away from the idea that that is anti-Islamic or nationalistic or racist, and that it's actually self-love and could be a means of loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I think that would be a good place to start, at least with that mental shift.
Okay. I want to move to the topic of leadership and women in leadership, and in the Islamic community, in the Masjid, in Islamic institutions. What are your views on leadership and women leadership, and what is the status of it as you see it in the Muslim community today?
So I think that when it comes to women leadership, I would say that there has been a lot of progress. For one, if we can just take a step back as to what is leadership, because I think it's always problematic to only see leaders as the people out in front. There are all kinds of leaders. There are leaders who are behind the scenes and they're doing the organization. I'm sure there were women who helped to organize this, right, besides for us being a part of it. So I think that's important. And then, I can certainly say from when I was growing up compared to now, I see a lot more female speakers. I see a lot more Muslim women who are out in front and leading. So I would just say, at least initially, that I think there's been a lot of progress.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'd second your point about sort of needing to, define or just discuss what it means to be a leader, because I think not just in the Muslim community, but I think across the board, our idea of what it means to be a leader and what a leader looks like, not only has it been genderized or racialized, but it's also been, associated with a particular personality type, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is someone who is very charismatic and, they can schmooze with people for hours and, they can crack jokes, really easy. And, they're a big personality type. And while, of course, many leaders do have those personality characteristics, I think it does do a disservice, because that's just a personality type, right? The person who's sort of more naturally given, and they have this disposition to be out in front and personable and with people. And I think actually both for men and women, it can kind of be something that gives people pause when they think about being in positions of leadership, but they say to themselves, well, but I'm not, super charismatic, or, I'm not boisterous, I'm not, XYZ. And, for people who don't have those particular characteristics, they often feel like, well, if I'm not like that, then I can't be a leader. And I think both men and women have felt that way. And so, yeah, I think we're sort of slowly expanding the idea of what a leader looks like, what their personality has to be like. And I think that's a really positive thing, because at the end of the day, when you want to choose a leader in a particular field, you want it to be the person who has, the expertise and the experience, right? And we shouldn't care whether that person is, super charismatic or not, or whether, they can schmooze for hours on end. We should be able to be sort of mature enough as a community to simply recognize, talent and ability and give it a platform so that it can lead us and benefit us. And I think that will benefit, both men and women, to sort of expand the idea of what a leader looks like. And like my sister said, there are so many, there are people who lead not from in front. We have to, I think, give space for that. I think that's really important. And I think things are getting better, as far as I can tell. I think people are becoming more comfortable with the idea of women leading, or just people of different races leading. There's still resistance, but I feel like things have gotten better.
If you could have an ideal picture of what y'all mentioned, because it seems like what you were summarizing is that it is related to leadership and skill set and ability. So if one's a leader, we should find the one with the suitable skill set for that position of leadership that is needed. And sometimes, like this whole platform, there's a woman behind it running everything. I have nothing to do with it. Just out front. That's her skill set, right? And a lot of times, even when we had the African American Islamic Summit, people didn't realize, though there were men, maybe a lot of men as imams and out front, but the whole thing was by women. That the whole organization, the whole structure were women. And sometimes that's missed. What is a way in which we can highlight the skill set of the different elements of the community and showing that diversity in our community's development and leadership?
Yeah, well, I think that, I think it's always important to give people credit, and it's often necessary to do it publicly, right? So to let it be known at a conference or whatever that, okay, this is the head of operations, this is the, whatever, the head of the volunteers, all these, significant roles. And obviously everyone who helps, down to, the 17-year-old volunteer, is important, but especially for those who are spearheading different aspects of these things, then they should be, given the credit and the spotlight, because people won't know unless you tell them. And I also think, part of the responsibility falls on the community as well, because, and this is not necessarily a Muslim problem as much as it is a modern problem, that we are sort of drawn to spectacle, and we are drawn to the people who are the most out front and the most boisterous, and we don't really think about, oh, how did this even come to be, right? How did this operation come into existence? Who's behind all of this? Who are all of these people? And part of that, I think, that responsibility falls on the community as well, because we tend to want a certain kind of spectacle. We maybe don't demand, other shows of leadership, other ways that leadership manifests. We're not maybe asking the leading questions, in which we would then find out that, women are behind the scenes of something. So it goes both ways. There's responsibility on people in the organizations to make it known, but there's also the responsibility of the community to, to find out what's going on, to care enough about what's going on, and to not just be drawn to spectacle. Because when you're drawn to spectacle, that's what people will give you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it is absolutely just a problem of modernity. You know, it's why there's this bigger issue of people of women who are stay-at-home wives and they don't feel valuable because they're not seen. We're in a society where if you're not seen, then it's like you don't matter. So that has to do with, yes, absolutely, just modernity in general. And I think you're right, giving credit. I went to a conference once where at the end, they had all the volunteers come so we could, clap for all of them. I think things like that are important. So we see, oh, there are all these young people and all these women, and this wasn't just like, it's not just the speakers who have brought you, this value. It's all the people who are behind the scenes as well. So I think, yeah, I absolutely think that's crucial.
All right, I'm going to get to some tough questions now. That's just to warm you up.
Okay.
The issue of marriage in our communities and the difficulty of women a lot of times now finding suitable spouses and I'm more, when I say suitable, I mean that would allow the woman to, like, if you take you two, for instance, educated women who have, achieved a level of success in the world, and then trying to find suitable spouses within the Muslim community, and that whole process. I know many women who have been years and almost over a decade, some of them, looking for suitable spouses and having difficulty with that. Let me get your take on these issues from your experience and solutions to this issue. The marriage question.
The marriage question. I think there's a book of that title. I think, again, I think, it's not just an issue for the Muslim community or even just the Black Muslim community. I think across the nation, women struggle with this because they tend to be interested in marriage at a younger age than their male counterparts. And so that can cause some frustration, I think. And I think across the board, women are, at least Black women, right, tend to have more education, more degrees than male counterparts. And so again, that can pose, some problems there in terms of finding someone who is suitable. So it does seem to me like it's an issue across the board. I know Nuri has given a lot of thought to this, so
I mean, I have. I have, and I don't think to me, it's not something that actually has an easy solution. It is a real problem. There are a lot more women who are more educated, who are already out there making money, who may also be religious, may also have Islamic knowledge, if we're talking specifically about Muslims. And so there is alhamdulillah, years and years ago, even Imam Siraj spoke about this suitability issue in the Black Muslim community specifically. It is a real issue. And so the question is, what exactly do you want the outcome to be, to me? So since I have given quite a bit of thought to this issue, I'll give the couple that I've thought of. Is you have to think about, well, is your end goal suitability? You want someone who makes good money like you do, who has whatever, the religious background, educational background. I think very obviously you're going to have to open your pool, because if this is just how the Black community happens to be, you're going to have to go outside of your community. Not necessarily, but you're going to at least give it the possibility, the option. Secondly, I would ask, what do you want? Okay, maybe the end goal isn't someone that matches you exactly, but some of the things. So you want the husband that can take care of you, but maybe he doesn't have the degree. Maybe there are some things that you will not think are exactly suitable, but you can find in a man and you'd be happy with. What was the third option I had? I don't remember. But I think those are the two main ones. You have to, or maybe you say, no, I want the man who's exactly suitable, and he has to be a Black Muslim, and nothing else will do. I'll be single until I find him. That's also an option, you know? So I think you figure out what is your end goal that you feel like this is a must, and this is only what I'll settle with. And then you would be able to make the best decision from that, I think.
What resources or institutions that need to be set up to facilitate for young people getting married? Because I believe a lot of these things relate to the situation we live in our country based on systemic racism. That's why you have a massive amount of incarceration of Black Americans in prisons, and the educational disparity between whites and Blacks. So all of that creates an environment that suitability becomes quite difficult. So sometimes when you look at a problem, you also need to look at the root of it. So what needs to be done for us to improve the possibility of finding suitable mates for both men and women, because there's also some men who have difficulty finding women. So what needs to be instituted to assist in that?
You got it?
Yeah, I just had this thought that I feel like in other communities, like in some Muslim immigrant communities, they can be very proactive about getting their young people married, or at least engaged, right? So sort of finding that person, maybe wait a while, right? This tends to be a tendency. Wait till you finish school or something like that, but you have that engagement with that person. I feel like they're very proactive in that regard. And I don't know if I see a comparable, effort in the Black Muslim community. And I don't know what that is, because from what I've observed in the immigrant community, it's not always that there's some like organized system or institution that is making these marriages happen. It's more like a network. It's a network, and it's a feeling that this is a priority, right? And so I don't know if there's anything that, in the Black community that we necessarily sort of need to institute. I don't know if there's really money that needs to be spent. I think it's about prioritizing marriage, not assuming that it's just going to happen, by happenstance, that you're just going to find someone, but actually let there be, people who are proactive in the community, people who are already married, our elders, etc., who really see it as their responsibility to, make these connections between families. So yeah, and I'm sure there's things people can do. I mean, now we have so many Muslim dating apps. I wouldn't recommend Muslim dating apps necessarily, because I don't know that you can just take a non-Muslim idea and slap a Muslim thing on it and make it Islamic. And I think these personal connections and these connections between families are probably much better for us, and will help in other areas of our lives. So I think it's about prioritizing, and I think it's about being proactive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think I would add to that two things. It is a part, this is again another issue that's a part of the larger Black community specifically. There are a lot of Black women in general who have great careers, great education, and they're not married. And it's the same thing. I don't think, maybe it's just not a part of our culture. I don't know if it ever was, for parents to actively get involved in their children getting married. It is expected as something to happen. And honestly, there is a part of Black culture where women are expected to be independent, where there's almost this fear that's passed along generations that, be independent just in case, just in case you don't have a man, just in case you don't get married, make sure that you're independent. And I don't think that we as Muslims necessarily cut ourselves off from that. Also, on this point of families being involved, and maybe there are institutions that could be created to take the place of what could be a proactive family, to take that same role. I would say that the good thing about being proactive is that if you're proactive when your kids are in college, then there really actually isn't a chance for this suitability issue to come up, right? Because the suitability issue is when people are 25, 28, 35. That's when the woman might have surpassed in education and work. When you're 22, you're on the same level. So even that would sort of help with getting married younger and being more proactive would even help to get rid of this issue of suitability.
One topic that was mentioned is the relationship of women in the Masjid, and finding Masjid and creating an environment in Masjid that is, let's say, woman friendly. What are your experiences in the Masjid that you've been involved with, and what you think needs to be done to make it more women friendly or user friendly?
I think a basic recognition that women are probably half of the congregation or a significant portion of the congregation. And so just having more, whether it's female scholars, female leaders, is valuable so that women can also have that connection to leadership, to scholarship. So I've known some imams who actively, have asked me to speak at their masjid. They're trying to get more women to come and give lectures at the masjid. So they take this proactive stance because that's how they want, their masjid to be more women friendly, for women to have more access to women who have knowledge. And there's an issue of the space. Faatimah and I were talking about the possibility, which may not be possible for all masajid, but the possibility for there to be a space where either there's a main space that's shared by men and women, and then another space just for women who want that option, or a space for men and then a space for women and then a space for women with children, because that can also be an issue of women being lumped together with other women with children, which on a lot of times can be fine. But if it's a situation where women are trying to seek knowledge, then that can be an issue that men who are going to seek knowledge don't have to deal with. And then I would lastly say on that issue, having women's voices so that the women in your masjid can directly say, what do we need? What would make this space more friendly to us, more accessible to us, would always be a good place for any community to start.
Yeah, I think, some of our massages simply don't have the space to accommodate a lot of people in general, right? Whether it's women or men. So we have to be cognizant of that and respectful of that small space as women. However, a number of our massages are also massive, and can accommodate things like a main space / men's space, a women's space, and then a space for women with kids. Because, for me, it's funny now being on the other side where I have kids. I was telling my sister the other day, I was like, I'm not even trying to go to the masjid with my kids. Before I had kids, I was that person who, to be frank, was very bothered by other kids in the masjid, because for me, the masjid was a place of quiet and solitude and prayer. And now, I'm still close enough to that experience where now as a mom, I don't want to interrupt other people's prayer so that I can get a fraction of that at the masjid with my kids. So I think, where there is an opportunity to, accommodate everyone so that everyone can get a portion of, that tranquility that the masjid is for, I think we should always do that if it's possible to accommodate folks. And I think another thing would be, I don't even want to get into boards because I feel like boards are so tricky. I don't know what's going on with boards, masjid boards in America. And I think also, our masjids are so different across the country. There's some that are like, smaller shoe boxes and others that are like large corporate centers. When you say someone's an imam in America, you don't know if that person is a trained scholar or just the person who has the most Quran memorized. Like there's so, in the States, things are just on this huge spectrum. So it's so hard to talk to, sort of the masjid enterprise in America because it's like, what are you even talking about? But yeah, I think where there's space, we should accommodate women to the best of our ability, especially, we know that for so many, that's the only, sort of spiritual refuge that they have. And, we shouldn't sort of stamp out the love for the masjid from women's hearts, which I think sometimes happens that, as a girl, you grow up going to the masjid and then things start to change where you feel like you're uncomfortable, you're unwanted. And it's like that happens exactly when you need the masjid as a place of refuge and you're sort of being made to feel like maybe you shouldn't be here. So that, I think that has to change.
I think just on a practical note, I would add, I've seen a couple of masajid with this, that I think it would be really valuable if masjids had on hand abaya and hijab. And I say that because sometimes women walk into the masjid and they're not, maybe they're not modestly dressed, and they'll be harassed by the women in the masjid, which is a part of feeling unwelcome. And if it could simply be, this is a spiritual place, this is what we wear, here you go, you could just put this on. Even that, because I know growing up, I feel like that was a lot of the tension in the women's section of the masjid was around how people dressed and them feeling welcomed or not welcomed based on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's, like you said, there's sort of an easy way to fix that without making a big spectacle of things, but to have those resources on hand. Because as we know, in America, Muslim women tend to go through phases. When it comes to modish dress, it tends to be a bit of a journey. And so the last thing you need when you're sort of going through your phase and your identity crisis is for someone to make you feel like, you're less than and you're unwanted. So I think simple tweaks like that, where it's like, okay, I know I can get the abaya at the masjid, I'm going to pray in that without someone simply shooing me away. I think that can be huge for people.
Yeah.
I have, you raised, Ustad Faatimah, you raised a question that I was going to leave this whole subject out, but if you raised it, I'm bringing it, right? You were talking about the different types of masajid.
Sure.
And I like to break masajid into 3 categories, right? So, number 1, you have the corporate model, board, usually those rich people, doctors, engineers, professionals, take their money, come together, build a masjid, build a school, hire who imam they want. And that imam is usually just an employee. He's at the, beck and call of a board of directors. That usually is in the immigrant suburban community.
Yes.
Second type, you have as people got together, they put their money together, they build a masjid, they're just common people, they select an imam among them who's usually the most knowledgeable among them because they can't afford to pay him because that first model is paid. Salaries can go up to $150,000 a year, all the way to a low, maybe 55, right? And this second model is a community thing, and the imam is usually given some stipend or, for giving the Jumu'ah khutbah or whatever. Then you have, so that's a middle one. So the imam is really a part of a community model, a family. He's, he has a board, but, they work together. Then you have another, the third type, which is predominantly in the African American inner city, is you have as what they call me the benevolent dictator, which is the imam is put in a position usually where he's responsible for the orderly running, maintaining of the masjid. And even though he may have a board, but ultimately the imam is the decision maker within the community. So you have these three models, and you raised an issue, and I gave the models just to talk about that, and that's something we can add to. But you pointed to when you go to a masjid, you don't know if the imam is classically trained or is he the most knowledgeable, which comes into a big question, and I think is a question that we need to face in this country, no matter where we're at in this immigrant community or in the predominantly Black community, is how do you define, and this is up to you, both of you, scholarship or qualified? What is the determining factor that you use to judge that or weigh that? You raised it.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of a perennial conversation for me because it is an issue, and it kind of intersects with the conversation on leadership that we were talking about before, because if you have an imam who is not classically trained, like, okay, let's use an example of an imam who really is just the person who has like the most Quran memorized, and perhaps he's the oldest of the group, or he's probably also trusted, right? He's got some character strengths that people find praiseworthy. That's all great, but that community might find themselves in a leadership deficit, right? Because that person is not a teacher, right? So they can't lead in the teaching capacity. That person may not have experience dealing with, conflict in relationships, conflict in families, right? And so they can't lead in sort of the counseling capacity. And that becomes an issue when the community is asking for that person to be all of those things that they never perhaps claimed they could be, right? And if the community doesn't think to go outside of that person to find people who can, lead and guide them in those other aspects of their life, that becomes a real problem, and it can lead to a lot of negative consequences, I think. And it's definitely, I think, an issue in the Black Muslim community, but I've also seen it in the immigrant Muslim community, where it's the same thing. The imam is simply the person who has the best Quran recitation, and again, that's fine. That's fine as long as everyone is on the same page that this person has to offer. But if you need something else, you need to go to somebody else. The problem is when you try to put all of that on someone who doesn't have that to give, right? And so, so like I was saying, leadership deficits, leadership vacuums. And I see that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what we had spoken about before, my sister and I, was the idea of trying to, or seeing possibly a need to diversify leadership, as we put it, because absolutely not every imam is also qualified to be a counselor, or to be, or even to give Islamic knowledge that they may have. They're just the one who can lead the salah, who can do the khutbah, however they got into that position. But at least as a community grows, there should probably be a question of, okay, if we want someone to deal with marriages, what makes this person qualified to deal with marriages in particular, or even to deal with spiritual matters? It's such an interesting thing, because and you said it's in other communities, I guess my experience is of it being specifically in Black communities, that there is this idea that you go to the imam with everything. You need some money, you might go to the imam. You need counseling, you go to the imam. You need whatever you need. You have spiritual advice you want to seek, you go to the imam. And I think that, Allahu alam, but it seems that traditionally that wouldn't necessarily be the same person unless that person had really amounted a great deal of knowledge, right? People have their Sufi tariqa, and you have your fiqh teacher, and you have your teacher of Aqidah, and it's not Allahu alam, but it's more rare that someone is an expert in all of those fields, and they're a great relationship advisor or something. So we have, I think, unrealistic expectations. That's a part of the problem. And in our community, it kind of ties with the women leadership thing as well, because in our community, there are so many women who are in the social sciences who could be of service when it comes to relationships, which is a lot of, that's a huge chunk of what imams have to deal with, is people's relational problems. If that leadership could be diversified, and we also have in our masajid, counselors that we call, or social workers that we call on, that would be valuable, and that would fix the problem of an imam even needing to be qualified. Because it's, as you said, we're aware he is valuable in this area. Here's this sister who's valuable in this area, and on and on.
One of the things, get a little controversial. One of the things that I find, because myself, I was traditionally trained. I didn't learn through university, or I learned traditionally at the feet of scholars, right? Which is quite different from someone who learns, for instance, even in an Islamic university. So if you would have someone, for instance, he was a graduate from a famous Islamic university, his understanding of scholarship is not going to be the same as mine, right? The scales we use are going to be much different. Likewise, someone who graduated from Western University, even if it was in Islamic studies or social sciences, oftentimes we don't know how, in the same space, to divide that expertise. So, for instance, you have a lot of our sisters who are, have doctorates or PhDs in, the social sciences, and they want sometimes to assume roles as if your PhD or your doctorate or your master's made you know Islam. And this is a big problem. So we get, oh, you think y'all just super scholars. No, it ain't that. You're talking outside of your field. And I remember one of my teachers said something beautiful, that a person may be extremely proficient and skilled in one area and suffer from radical deficiencies in another. So that goes both sides. How do we get people to balance your area of expertise, stay in that, and don't go over into an area where you have no expertise? If you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
I give you an example, not to make a person. Sometimes you will have a professional. I'm a professional, I have a PhD. I want to deal with trauma in the community. So your studies of trauma is basically from Western education. Your Islamic knowledge has not even reached farda ayn, what is a personal obligation. But you're using the educational part to assume an authority in an area that you haven't learned. How do you join between the two? And just honest opinions, even if my thoughts are wrong. Just
I mean, I think we always need intellectual humility, right? No matter who we are, we have to be aware of our strengths and our weaknesses, right? And be honest about what we know and what we don't know. And that's, that's across the board, no matter what field you have specialized in, to recognize you specialize in that thing, right? So it goes both ways. If you specialized in, some area of the social sciences, or, counseling, therapy, psychology, then that's your strength, right? And don't be too assertive, right, or too presumptuous about knowing something that's not within your field. And then also, if you studied Islamic studies, don't be presumptuous about other fields. Like, what about me having studied Shafi'i fiqh makes me capable to give counseling advice? Nothing, right? And I think, and this is why, like when Nuri talked about diversifying leadership, that's super important. And it's also important that that leadership is in conversation, because our communities can be, robust and powerhouses if all of these people who have expertise in different fields are in conversation with each other, right? So the counselor, the therapist, who is very weak in their, Islamic studies or even their fadl, they should be in conversation with the imam, so that while they're perhaps offering their counseling services, they're also working on their own, gaining knowledge in their own Islamic studies, so that, eventually they can be a little bit more fluid, they can be a bit more careful, perhaps, in some areas where they're giving advice and counsel. And also the imam, right, who has perhaps, knowledge, is traditionally trained, if that's the case for him, well, he should be in conversation with the counselor, the therapist, the psychologist, right? Because people are going to still be asking him questions about, for life advice that he may not be qualified to give, but at least if he is in conversation with the person who has the expertise, he can little by little be able to, improve how he can help people, because people aren't going to stop coming to him for advice, right? And so he needs to be continuously growing as well. And, like I said, if these leaders are in conversation with each other, then you can build something really beautiful where, yes, everyone has their niche, but people are working together, people are learning from each other, and then you can really be of benefit to your
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would add that there absolutely has to be a trust before any of this could happen, right? So you have to trust the psychologist that you're hiring or that you are going to try and outsource people to. And I would, on a practical note, then I would say that maybe there is some basic level of knowledge that you want anyone who's going to work with your community to have, whatever Masjid may decide to take this on as a possibility, that you say, okay, you need to have your fard ayn down, like, and that may be strange, to test someone on their Islamic knowledge before you can work with them. But if that's your standard, then that would be valuable to do. I think we do also need to acknowledge that if people are going to get help from outside the community, if they don't have a connection to Muslim therapists, right, then they're going to go to non-Muslims, and that presumably is worse than, at least if you go to a Muslim that maybe they're not 100%, maybe they have some of it, and hopefully the gaps will be filled with the imam, with the shayukh in the community. So, I think this is a very difficult thing because, like you said, Faatimah, like some people will say, or rather some imams will feel that they are qualified to give advice, because I think probably all of us kind of do, just naturally think, well, yeah, I know, So it's a funny thing that I think is maybe more so on the other side of imams kind of playing all these roles than of those who studied in social sciences, or maybe I don't have enough experience with those people to know how they operate. So yeah, there has to be a trust there. You can't work with people that you don't trust their knowledge or their perspective, on Islam.
Yeah. And I think we do have to be reasonable, right? Like, because if there are people in the community who need, help in the mental health space, do we want to deny them, access to a Muslim mental health professional because that professional is weak on their Islamic knowledge? I don't know. Now, if you're talking about a professional that like doesn't pray or something, or that has really harmful views, that would be different. But I think we have to also recognize that many of our communities are in, nascent stages, and sometimes people just, they need help now, and they, and you want to give them something as opposed to nothing, while also working on a long-term plan to make sure that, whoever is coming into the community to help has met some basic standard of knowledge that makes you feel comfortable as the leader of that community.
And see, one of the things that I try to, when I think of these issues, I always think of tomorrow. I look at our communities is we inherited something, right, from our predecessors in the religion. And it's a whole deen, because deen is just not Islamic studies. Deen is not just economics. Deen is family, community, interaction with the society. We have all these aspects that we have to tackle. And I agree with y'all 100% that we need to find as a community how to join all of that. And what practical steps would y'all give to take? Because we are a society within a society as Muslims. And then we are a society within the society as Black Muslims. How do we reconcile all these different challenges that we are facing and put them in a cohesive manner so that we can move together as a community?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good point about thinking about tomorrow. So that could be the place that we start, is how do we want our communities to look tomorrow? So you mentioned the 3 different types of masjids. What do we think is ideal? Do we think that corporate model is ideal? Like which one of those do we think is ideal? And then trying to work towards that. And maybe as Black Muslims, we want to think about that together. Maybe each masjid wants to do its own thing. I don't know. But that's definitely a part of it. For me, as we were just mentioning on this point of diversifying leadership, I think that we're better if we are working together with people who are experts in different areas. And so we mentioned the counseling thing. It could also be business and just different people who know what they're doing in specific areas. And we think of a community. What does a community need? And then we have professionals that represent that and that can work together. So yeah, but I think it starts with what do we want it to look like, and so that we can begin to work towards that.
Yeah, totally. I think, once you have a vision, a clear vision for what the future looks like, and really something that you can articulate, because sometimes we have, these ideas, and it's like, oh, if you had to write about it, what do you even know what you would say? If you had to write, a 10-page essay about what is the vision for my community, put down. And so I think, having that clarity, right, really point by point about what every, facet and aspect of the community should look like. I think that's the first step. And then figuring out, okay, well, how long do you think it's going to take to get there? And then sort of working backwards. to figure out, okay, well, what are we willing to do now that, would be a positive step forward, but it might, still be a little rugged, right? But we're willing to do it because it's a positive step forward and it's a step towards our long-term vision. And then I think you have to be willing to start, because sometimes it's only in starting and trying and being active that you figure out what works and what doesn't. Because sometimes there can be, a bit too much theory, or there's a hesitation to start because you think you need to be perfect and you need to have all the resources to begin. But oftentimes people don't know how to navigate a thing unless they actually, get in the ship and try the waters.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes before we have to end. So I want to ask a question before. So we got 15 minutes. If someone had a question related to the things we talked about in the chat, please put it up so we can share it and get your involvement. But I always don't like to have people on without letting the community know what activity they're doing that the community may be able to, because we have a nice audience of people around the country, in fact, around the world who listen. Are there any projects you're doing that they could support you in or spread or share if any of y'all are doing anything?
I think Nuri would have more to say in this regard. She does more. She does more sort of forward-facing things than I do. But I will say, since I assume that much of our audience is a Black audience, am I right in assuming that?
Well, mostly, but everyone is all over. We got people from all walks of life, but predominantly our conversation been related to the Black community, but everyone engages. So the majority of people would be from the Black community, but they following us, especially now because a lot of other communities want to know, how can I be involved? How can I help? Especially with the situation of the country right now. So you're going to meet multiple audiences.
Yeah, well, the reason that I asked specifically about if there was a predominantly Black audience is because I kind of want to make a little bit of a pitch that I wasn't asked to make, but I'll do it anyway, to maybe our younger audience and also parents of kids in high school, that I really would love for more of our Black community members to check out Zaytuna College. I'll say one big reason for that is because the financial aid is extremely generous. If you qualify, you get in. If you don't have the money, it doesn't matter. And this is really important for a lot of members in our community who maybe think about college and they get very anxious because of the costs associated with that. So I would say do that. I would say if you're looking to study Islam, but are hesitant about traveling anywhere to do that because of for whatever reason, then I also think Zaytuna is a good option. And I really, as a Black graduate from that school, I really want to see more Black students there. I think that's really, really important. One of our co-founders, Imam Zaid, has been such a boon and an asset to the Black Muslim community and the Muslim community overall. And I think a great tribute to his continuing legacy would be that more Black students, go to his school. So that's what I would say. Doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't have anything.
Hey, listen.
I want
one of the things I asked that question is because one of the things that we have to learn to do as a community at whole, and in the world's learning to come to grips with this. We have to learn to cooperate with one another, even when we don't see eye to eye on every issue. Mm-hmm. That's just reality. I mean, we live in a world. You gotta live with people, right? When I finish this, I got an appointment with Christians, Jews, politicians. This is the world we live in. You better figure it out. So I'm not one who says, that's why I asked, and everyone sees things from their own lens. So I wanted to know your lens, and so that's an opportunity that people may not even know that's available, right?
Exactly.
Since you mentioned it, there is some listener who may want to pursue it. So I guess they can use you as a reference. Okay, alhamdulillah. Sister Nuriddeen?
Okay. Yes, as Faatimah said, I do have a lot. But I'll say that both Faatimah and I are fellows for Yaqeen, so you can find some of our writing work there. Yeah, alhamdulillah, I do work with quite a few organizations, that sort of thing, and also writing. So I don't know what to plug, but I'll just say that those are some of the things that I do. And you can find my writing all over the place, inshallah. Tell them.
Okay, in closing, do y'all have any closing comments or thoughts, wherever y'all may be, to summarize? Oh, wait a minute. Let me see if I can get questions. Okay. Y'all see that question?
Yes.
Whoever wants to tackle it.
I'm not sure I understand.
So we always talk about, I guess the summary the person's asking is, people always talking about the prophetic model of community building, and they hear all this, but how can we take that prophetic model and make it something that is practical on the ground in our reality? That's what I gather from what he's asking.
I would just say that, alhamdulillah, we always want to follow the Prophet's sunnah wherever we can, and wherever, in every part of our lives, it's relevant. At the same time, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but at the same time, I think that as Muslims, we can complicate issues a bit because we're trying to find the exact parallel from the Prophet ﷺ's life. And I think that instinctively and within Islam as well, we know what we need to do. Like a lot of these things we know we have to do. It's just a matter of how are we going to do it to address our reality on the ground. So when you find a comparable sunnah, then let's do it. But let's not be so hesitant to try and make that parallel that we don't acknowledge and pay attention to our own reality on the ground and things that we know we have to do. It's just a matter of coming together and figuring out how exactly we want to do it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think sometimes it's the how that we need to focus on more, as opposed to the what that we're trying to accomplish, because usually the what that we're trying to accomplish is in line with a prophetic vision for the Muslim community, with the Quranic vision for the Muslim community. So that's not what we need to worry about. It's about strategies and tools and things like that, and a lot of that is just based on what you have available to you where you are, what your resources are, and what kind of systems you have to work within to accomplish your goals. But I would say one thing is, we have the example of, the Muhajirun and the Ansar, who, coming from different places, have different resources, have different strengths, and he linked them, right? We have this brotherhood that he instituted between them so that they could support one another. And I think when we talk about sort of diversifying leadership, that's a model that we can look at to say, listen, I have this resource, you have this resource. Maybe I have the knowledge, right? But maybe you have the financial resource. And so what can we do to benefit everyone by relying on each other's strengths?
Yeah. I just want to, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to add to that. And I recently said this at a,
down, please.
Sorry?
No, I was trying to get the question down. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so in this conversation where a lot of people are non-Black Muslims are asking how they can help, I recently said this at 2 different events that I think that what non-Black Muslims have, this is, a generalization, is the financial capital, and that Black Muslims have the cultural capital. So I think in that vein, for those who aren't Black and are listening, that is one of the biggest things for us to see that equal value in each other. And that would be really powerful to put those two together. So I think that is on a larger scale, then that is also powerful in terms of working with other communities within the Muslim community.
Here comes the tough question. We talked about the struggle of finding suitable spouses and thing in Islam, and maximizing in the Black community, finding husbands. And also interracial marriage and all of those, and solutions of broadening your options was the suggestions. What is the sister's position on polygyny being an available option, solution?
Yeah.
Faatimah, yeah.
So, the way that I feel about polygyny is great for people who want it, which I kind of feel like is obvious, but unfortunately, there are circumstances that happen where, sometimes women find themselves, in a polygamous marriage that they never intended to be in because the husband decides later on that he wants to be polygamous, blah, blah, blah. I think we should try to avoid that at all costs. I think the way for people to have healthy polygynous marriages, and I'm not in one, I've never been in one, so I'm sure there are things experientially to speak to that I wouldn't know to say. But I would think that, as with any marriage, the way to start off with a healthy foundation is for everyone in that relationship to want to be in that relationship.
Yeah.
And I think we've always sort of assumed that no woman wants to be in a polygamous marriage. And I don't think that's true. I think women fall on a spectrum. There are some who are very interested, and that's probably the minority. And then there's others who are very much so against, right? Those are 2 ends of the spectrum. But there are some women who are sort of in between, who would think about it under certain circumstances, who might consider it more if they had been divorced with kids, if they're older. So there's all these different scenarios. And I think we would be wise to help women who want to be in a polygamous marriage, or who don't mind it, to go in that direction, right? As opposed to kind of what has been the trend of, a woman finding out later on that, her husband wants to be polygamous, but he didn't say so from the beginning. I think that's to be avoided. People should, have free will when it comes to who they're in relationship with. And I think, helping people who want to be in polygamous marriages find each other is the best and healthiest way to go about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Free will, that's always important. I would also just say that obviously polygamy is happening in the Black Muslim community. And unfortunately, often, I don't know how much, but often enough, it can be surrounded by various types of drama or feelings of betrayal, etc. So I think that we do need to have a conversation within the community about what would an ideal version of polygamy be. And I think we need to talk about all of the issues that I feel are overlooked. There's the issues of legality, there's the issue of time, there's the issue of money, there's the issue of support, there's the issue of even the social stigma. So I think there are just so many issues that, it's an interesting thing, because usually when we're having the conversation, it's a matter of for or against. So, and really it can be, a for and a kind of pressuring women who are against. But I think that once we have that conversation, as my sister said, that it should be about free will and people want to be in that situation, then we continue on with the people who would consider it and say, how does this ideally look, given all of the circumstances, given all of the inherent issues of practicing polygamy in America? How can we make it something that is beneficial to both men and women, and possibly within the, make it a possible solution to some of the issues in the Black community?
You know, when I should have my comment on this, because I really, because you mentioned the issue of when we talk about these types of marriages, we always talk about it usually from a for or against. And I would like to put another picture, whether one is inclined to it or uninclined to it. I like to put things in an Islamic perspective all the time. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala allowed this as a permissible aspect of our religion. And when we look at our religion, we look at everything under the lens of the sacred law. Something's an obligation, something is recommended, something is permissible, something is disliked, or something is unlawful. And everything within our lives are going to fall under that. So what I always encourage each other to do is to say, listen, first of all, before we talk about any matter, what is the Islamic religious judgment for this thing we're talking about, right? Once we define that, if it is in the obligations or the prohibition, then that is already a realm that we don't have choice in, except for circumstances and conditions, exceptionary conditions. But normally, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made something, or the Messenger of Allah made something as an obligation, it's an obligation, unless there are circumstances that lift that obligation for that circumstances. Or if it's a prohibition, the same case. In between that, then we got those things that are recommended. If you do it, you are rewarded. And those things which are disliked, if you do it, if you refrain from it, you are rewarded. Then we have this wide area, which is the area of permissibility. And what I would like us as Muslims to keep in mind, whenever we talk about especially this issue of polygyny, that it's something that Allah has made permissible. Sometimes it can be recommended, sometimes it can be disliked, but it is in the realm of permissibility, right? And anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or his messenger made permissible, I'm talking about at the heart level, we should have no disdain for it. Even if we don't do it, even if we're not inclined to it, at the heart level, we should accept it is something that the lawgiver, synonymous with Allah and his messenger, allowed. And if we're not censoring it or being for it for that reason, then I think it goes back to us adjusting our intention towards doing things. So I think that should be an aspect that is brought into the conversation that is left out. The state of my heart towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger has allowed. Even if I don't engage in it, I accept that it's something in our religion. That's just an aspect that I wanted to add to the conversation.
So can I say, Sheikh, that...
Say whatever you like.
Okay, I think that absolutely that is... Here's the thing. I think that is a part of the conversation, but there's a part of me that doesn't. The only reason I say that is because I think we all know that polygamy is legal, right? So that, or let me not say it's not a part of it. I think we all can, obviously we know polygamy is legal. And then I think that what Faatimah said is sort of the next step of it. As you mentioned, it could be disliked or preferred or somewhere in between. So for the individual or for the community, what is the status of it specifically to their situation? And then I think on top of that, for when we say it's for, well, how is it best done? Because I feel that when we get into this area of just focusing on legality and how does your heart feel about it, then we're not addressing those more specific issues of, okay, this is not legal in America. How is that going to function in terms of equality? Okay, there's a social stigma. If you are, especially as Black Muslims, we usually have non-Black relatives, and et cetera. We're not a Muslim society. The social stigma of saying this is my second wife, or however that sounds, and what that woman has to deal with. And that's not me saying that polygamy is bad. I'm sure it works for a lot of people. I'm just saying that I think there has to be a part of the conversation that says, how do we address those real concerns, primarily of women? And how do we talk about what is the ideal version of these kinds of marriages beyond permissibility, beyond halal and haram?
Right. And I think, all we're required to do is accept what Allah has made permissible, right? We're not required to like it, right? So eating lamb is permissible. That doesn't mean I have to like lamb. God is not forcing me to like something that I don't like. I just have to accept the fact that, okay, God made it permissible. Some people are going to eat it. Great. And we're not really required to do anything other than that. We just accept it. And so I do think that's an important aspect, right? And it's the case with any other area of the law that we may not like or understand, that we simply have to accept it. But like Nuri was saying, we also have to move past that, right? Because this conversation is sort of about the community and how do we have healthy communities. And if we don't have healthy marriages and healthy families, then there is no healthy community. It's a sham without that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to polygamy, like I said, is the only time I have an issue with polygamy is when people are forced into it. Just like I have an issue with any other sort of forced marriage. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't see it as necessary. And it can be particularly devastating in the area of polygamy when you have kids and extended family and people involved. That's my only issue. And I think we're not, as a community, doing ourselves a service by kind of just allowing it to happen, sweeping it under the rug, not having conversations about what a healthy polygamous marriage would look like. And like I said, I think what we really need to do is we need to find a way to connect men and women who are inclined and want to be in those arrangements, right? Stop forcing this on people. Stop, leading people on into thinking this is not what someone wants. There are people who want to be in those relationships. There are people who are inclined towards those relationships. Let's help those people find each other, right? And then we won't have problems. Right now we have problems because people who don't want this are mixed with people who do want this. And it doesn't make any sense.
I have a question related to the legal standpoint of this, which is beautiful about America. I think these conversations can get vast because I look at the LGBT community, and when I look at that, I look at a time, even in my lifetime, that wasn't something that was accepted in society. But those people who were inclined to that, obviously we know our religious ruling to that. That's one story. I'm not talking about that. But there are people who, regardless of our religious disposition and belief, they're inclined to that life. But what they did is they organized themselves till they made it a force to be reckoned with, and they changed the view of the society and even changed laws. So from our standpoint, in relation to this issue, I believe that the Muslims should take the same energy, the same political lobbying to make that thing legal and permissible for them. And I think that struggle of that community is an example what diligence and hard work and lobbying and pulling your resources can produce, to the point in the workplace, whether we agree or not, that is an accepted practice. To the bathrooms are changed. Well, likewise, why can't the issue in Islam that is a permissible thing in our religion become a standard practice in this country as well?
Yeah.
Right.
I would say two things. I think when we're talking about the Black community and solutions for marriage, I would say if we're willing to talk about polygamy, we should also be willing to talk about interracial marriage. I see no reason not to bring that into the equation if we're willing to talk about polygamy. And I think for, I don't want to say the majority, but I think for many women, they'd be more interested in simply marrying outside of their race and expanding their pool than entering into a polygamous marriage where they don't have any frame of reference for it, they don't even know what that is, and maybe it's something that they personally dislike. So, I think from my observation, I've been in conversations where we're talking about solutions on marriage to the Black community, and polygamy is brought up, but interracial marriage is not brought up. Now, again, it's fine to be sort of I don't want to say race purist because that has a bad connotation. It's fine, I think, to marry someone within your own race. And if that is a huge priority for you, then, you might have to make some concessions in other areas. You might, find yourself looking at polygamy if you don't feel like you have any other choices, in your community. That's fine. But I do think there are many most Black Muslim women, and this is becoming especially more the case, that would feel comfortable simply expanding their pool. And that doesn't have to be a white American necessarily. That could be, a Black African, whatever. But it's expanding the pool. And I would also say that when it comes to changing the tide in the American political landscape, we have to look at priorities. For me, I would not want to spend whatever small political capital I have on legalizing polygamy. I just don't think it's important enough. But I think it's fine if there's a segment of the community that's willing to champion that. But I'm not going to spend what I feel is a limited political capital, and frankly, what I think is a limited political capital for the Muslim community on that issue. I think we probably have other issues that we can prioritize. But again, I wouldn't stop someone from doing that if they wanted to. I would say I wouldn't join that bandwagon because I feel like my energies could be better spent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say that in terms of it becoming a legal issue, I would also agree it's not high on, I don't think it's high on the Muslim priority list, even for those who are polygamous, want to be polygamous. I just haven't really seen that interest in trying to legalize it, Allahu Alam. But I would say that I think more immediately, because even if we started today, that would be a very long fight. The whole gay rights thing, that was a long fight for them. Mm-hmm. So it's fine if someone wants to start that initiative, but I think more immediately is at least beginning to have the conversation about what healthy polygamy looks like in our community. Because, unfortunately, I think Faatimah and I would agree that unfortunately we've heard a lot more bad stories than good ones. And, Allahu Alam, that could just be a thing of bad news travels faster, who knows? But we can't have really a healthy community if there is so much devastation in marriages. And so we have to talk about, okay, if polygamy, even communities can set up some kind of, or maybe this entire, Black initiative that you're doing, Shif, there can be a discussion about what would ideal polygamy look like? What do we want to happen or not happen? Should the wife be, of course, I would agree that the wife should be informed, but let's just say, for example, the wife should be informed. Each wife should have X, whatever we're going to say, that ideally this is what it should look like. It shouldn't be a secret. It should be out in the open, whatever sort of guidelines we want to have around that, so that at least we can remove some of the devastation and just sort of negative feelings around polygamy. Because we don't have, I think that unfortunately so many women have this negative sentiment around polygamy because that's what we know. So if the conversation could change about what does it look like when it's healthy, I think that would be a more immediate sort of next step, just in the community, to have that conversation.
Inshallah, we are unfortunately out of time. I wish we had more. But if y'all can give me another time, that there are other questions, some things, maybe sometimes next week you can get together and we can further some issues, because I would like to, there are many discussions about the interracial marriage thing. It's been a big issue in the Black community, and many of our, especially in the Sunni community, among Black leaders who are interracially marriage, that's been a big issue and, sort of a taboo topic. But that's the good thing to having the Black Imams Roundtable. There's no topic off the table. and I think really for me, all of these issues is our standard has to be Islam. And then we work from there. We work out the kinks from the standard of Islam first. Our deen is the most important. Obedience to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and His Messenger, that's most important. And then dealing with our reality within that scope. So that's my closing words. And if y'all have some closing comments before we end.
Alhamdulillah, I just want to thank you for allowing us to be on and speak about these topics. Alhamdulillah, I'm grateful for that. Okay.
Yes, I would echo that. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, inshallah, one of y'all would close us out with dua. This is women's right leadership. Lead the dua. Close us out.
Faatimah.
صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ya Allah, if there's anything that we have said that has upset you, please correct us in the most gentle ways. Ya Allah, please guide our hearts and our tongues towards knowing the truth and towards saying the truth. Illuminate all of us with your light, the light of your guidance, the guidance of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ya Allah, guide us towards good leadership. Give us good leaders. Make the next generation full of good leaders. Grant us the humility to follow good leaders. And grant us a way forward and many ways out of whatever troubles and tribulations that we are in, and show us a brighter future and give us hope in the future. Amen.
Amen. بسر أسرار الفاتحة. Thank y'all very much. You made a lot of people happy, and inshallah we'll discuss behind the scenes. Barakallahu bikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.